So almost 35 years ago, not long after Mitch and I were married, when we were young pastors in Vermont, young, especially the young part, we bought a tandem bicycle to do bicycle touring on. We had done some touring on single bikes, but we wanted to do it on a tandem. We called it our zero carbon RV. It was easily the most expensive thing we'd ever owned. Mm-hmm. And we had so much fun on that bike. We took it on tours in the US, in Canada, in the Yucatan Peninsula, in Mexico. This was before bike touring was quite as popular as it is now. And when we would roll into town with 4 panniers on our bikes, and once we had children, a child in a sidecar, people noticed us.
We were a sight.
Right.
Yeah.
And we would usually get one of 2 reactions.
The first reaction would start with a look of surprise, and then it would turn into a big grin. And I imagine the cartoon thought bubble above their heads going, "What is that? Oh, it's one of those bicycle built for 2 things. That looks like fun, like that old song, Daisy, Daisy. You'll look sweet upon the seat of a bicycle built for 2. You can practically hear them singing. In the Yucatan, we were in very rural, small towns in the Yucatan, and we'd come into town, and the kids would come out, and they'd be laughing, and we'd stop the bike, and I'd have the little kids get on the back seat and give them short rides around the Zocalo, and Barb would try to chat up the very shy Mayan women. And,
in my very bad Spanish.
The tandem was an amazing icebreaker in those areas.
And then there was the other reaction that we would sometimes get. Again, a look of surprise, and then usually a frown.
It wasn't really a frown, it was, "It smells like dog poop around here" kind of look. It's like, that's wrong.
Well, or just, and we imagined that the thought bubble there was something along the lines of, what is that? I was not expecting that today, and frankly, I'm not happy about it. It was as though our strangeness was an intrusion in what would have been an otherwise normal day. Like we were stirring things up somehow by riding by.
The reading from chapter 16 of Exodus that Sequan read for us is also, in a sense, about how people react to something unexpected dropping into their lives. This is, there's only 1 chapter after we just had the Miriam taking a tambourine and celebrating all the people, giving thanks for God's tremendous, miraculous saving of them through the Sea of Reeds. It's just 6 weeks after they've become a newly freed people in the wilderness. And the first thing they do as a free people is kvetch. They complain, "We're hungry. Hey, Moses." And they also idealize what life of slavery was back in Egypt. Back in Egypt, we at least had food to eat. You just brought us all the way out here to kill us with hunger? Now, the complaining is aimed at Moses and Aaron because everyone can see Moses and Aaron, but ultimately the complaining was toward God, coming out of their fear. Does God care about us or not?
And God answers their kvetching, right? By providing them quail in the evenings, falling from the sky. Possibly they were migrating and they fell out of the sky in exhaustion. And then in the morning, there's this mysterious substance on the ground that we've come to call manna. And there's a couple of naturalistic explanations for what manna might have been. Entomologists say that there were a scale insect that attacked a tamarisk tree, and they excreted from their back end, to be indelicate,
hinder parts, as the King James would put it.
A sugary substance that can be eaten. That's one possible explanation. It melts in the sun, but at the beginning of the day, it's there.
Now, botanists also describe an edible North African species of lichen that when it's mature can get uprooted by the Scirocco winds and can be deposited hundreds of miles away. In the 19th century, there was a botanist who was in North Africa who said that the lichen in some places up against cliff sides was 2 feet deep and could be collected and ground up and eaten as bread.
Or there was manna on the ground. Again, wherever you are, as far as miracles, those are the things that you can hang on to. But for us this morning, it's not so much what the manna was, as it was how people responded to it that we're interested in. Because the word manna comes from the Hebrew word manhu, which literally means, what is it? What is this white flaky stuff? And what are we supposed to do with it? One of the ways we thought of how people might respond to manna would be to say, wow, what is this? The same way that people would say to us as we came by with the tandem, wow, what is that? In a let's get going kind of way.
The other way to say manhu is WTF, which in this context is, what's this? Food? That's the scowl we would get from some people when we would ride by on our tandem, when we seem to be ruining their day by just existing. Right. Manhu, what is this? A delightful, unexpected gift? Or something weird, unwelcome that God is doing to us?
We want to share with you the reflections from Barbara Brown Taylor, a former Episcopal priest, because per usual, when she describes something, it's hard to come up with a better way to say it.
She's the best.
She says, what makes something bread from heaven? Is it the thing itself or the one who sent it? How you answer that question has a lot to do with how you sense God's presence in your life. If manna has to drop out of heaven as a perfectly shaped loaf of bread, chances are you're going to go hungry a lot. When you don't get the miracle you're praying for, you're going to think that God is ignoring you or punishing you, or worse yet, that God isn't there. You're going to start comparing yourself with other people and wondering why they seem to have more to eat than you, and start complaining to God about that, or more health, or more happiness. Meanwhile, you'll miss all of the things that God is doing for you because they seem too ordinary or too transitory, like manna.
Taylor continues, if, on the other hand, you are willing to look at everything that comes to you as coming from God, then there will be no end to the manna in your life. Because it's not what it is that counts. Right. What counts is who sent it. And the miracle is that God is always sending us daily bread. Every day. No matter how much the things that come to us might look like bread or the back end of a bug, we can say, well, this is what God has sent us today. We can work with this. In our experience over the last 35, it's so weird when you're only 27, how you've been ministering for 35 years. It's weird. But over the last 35 years of working with folk...
I just want to say, I don't want to be 27 again.
Okay,
just
no, it's just 47 was good. That was nice. We've worked with a lot of folks. We've sat with a lot of folk dealing with illness and death.
All kinds of life situations.
All kinds of life situations, good and bad. It's one of the privileges of being a pastor is you get to walk with people or sit with people during the greatest joys and the greatest sorrows of their life. And we've seen very different ways that people declare manhu What is it in their lives? We've sat with people who are facing a difficult medical diagnoses, and some will say, I'm going to fight this cancer with everything I've got. And some say the flip side, I've lived a good life, and I'm ready to let this disease take its course, and I'm going to accept it. And we have seen both tactics work really well in very positive, life-affirming ways. Even when the end was death, it was a death that came with wholeness and a life-affirming and God-affirming and human-affirming reality.
We believe both of those responses. I'm going to fight it with everything I've got, and I'm going to accept this with everything I've got, are the kind of manhu that says, okay, I can work with this, right? Both tactics treat every day as a new gift to struggle on, a new gift to receive as the day that's been given. Both days are filled with thanksgiving and filled with gratitude and filled with resourcefulness and filled with a chance to grow into who it is that God is with us in this very moment. Even days when everything else seems to be going wrong, that are filled with nausea and fatigue and loss of hair and loss of life, we've been humbled and awed and honored by the ability to be with folk who face those days struggling to learn how to have this day's manna be my daily food, be a gift from God.
And then there are the folks who also work hard and struggle, but not against the disease, but against the reality of what they're facing and a perceived injustice of it all. Instead of asking, Manhu, what is it? What's next? How do I respond to the challenge? They ask, Manhu, why me? Why this? Who caused this? Or they'll declare that God's not being fair because I got this disease. And their hearts and minds are in a place of bitterness and despair and anger and passivity in a strange sense. And they often have very different outcomes. They're often sicker. They're almost always more depressed. And even if their body heals because the medicine was able to work, their spirit is wounded and sick.
And so as we've pondered this and talked about this week, it seems to us that part of the difference in those situations is whether or not folks are grounded in a commitment to gratitude, in a belief that a gift is a gift even when, especially when, it's hard. Diana Butler Bass wrote on Thursday, which was National Gratitude Day. Don't know if you knew that it was. That gratitude is a resilience. Gratitude transforms how we understand what is broken. Gratitude gives us the ability to act more joyfully and with hope, no matter what's before us.
So the difference in how people respond is one, partially grounded in commitment to gratitude. It's also grounded in relationship. How is it that we're related or in connection with the giver? A relationship of trust that can keep us open even when things are unexpected. I've got a pretty trivial example, but when we lived in Burlington, Vermont, or near Burlington, Vermont, there's an amazing restaurant in Vermont called The Single Pebble.
If you go to Burlington, you have to go to The Single Pebble.
an amazing Asian restaurant. And when we ate there, there was an incredible menu, but they also had a thing you could check off called, I want to call it Chef's Surprise, but it's not. It's called the Chef's Tasting Menu.
Okay.
And it would consist of several small portions of whatever adventurous thing the chef was mixing up that day in the kitchen. You got to be part of his experiment. And there was adventurous new things that the chef was creating every day. And whatever came out of the kitchen was without fail creative and interesting. And you almost always...
I would say, and we loved almost all of them.
But whenever it came out, you were always like, man, who? What is this?
And we could say that because we had experience with that chef. We knew it would be interesting.
I don't know if we ever met the chef, but we knew what we could expect from him. We trusted him. So if the waiter ever came out and said, okay, this next dish is made out of bug butts.
Right?
We would have gone, okay, let's give this a shot. Because we could trust what the chef offered us was going to be at least interesting, creative, and amazing.
And when I think about those Hebrews, so soon out in the wilderness, so soon liberated from slavery, I think they didn't really have much of a relationship with God yet. God had done some amazing things, but they weren't really clear that they could trust God to hold through. And they didn't even really know Moses all that well, to be honest. There hadn't been enough time. Over the next 40 years of wandering through the wilderness on their way to the promised land, then they built up that trust. Imperfectly, to be sure, but they developed a relationship with God that sustained them through the challenges that came their way. It became more, their manhu became more wow than WTF over time. And so our charge to you and to us, our challenge to you and to us, our plea, really, this morning, is that we all find ways to trust that the love who made the universe is also here for us with amazing gifts. Because if we're based there, then we can be open and receptive to whatever comes our way, and we can find manna at the rising of every sun and find quail at the setting of the day, sustaining food in what comes our way, no matter what it is. As Barbara Brown Taylor said, the miracle is that God is always sending us daily bread, every day. May this be true for us. Amen.